Hey y'all, welcome back. Today we're checking out. I compared UK and USA sitcoms, and they're shockingly different. They are, y'all. They're different.
Hi and welcome back to the Girl Gone London channel.
Hi,
Today
Ken.
we're talking about US versus USA sitcoms, so let's get started. Something that might seem boring but is actually very important to note. The episode counts are very different. British sitcoms typically run 6 to 8 episodes per series, while American sitcoms traditionally aimed for 22 to 24 episodes per season. This is a completely different approach to storytelling that affects everything from character development to production budgets to how audiences consume comedy. The British model emerged from the BBC.
Yeah, that 22 to 24 episode thing is, I don't think anybody does that anymore. I mean, honestly, there really aren't any sitcoms made anymore in America. There might be a couple, but they're all not really sitcoms, you know? And it seems like most shows have somewhere between 6 and 15 episodes, maybe?
The British model emerged from the BBC's public service mandate and limited resources. With smaller budgets and a focus on quality over quantity, British producers developed what you might call boutique comedy. Carefully crafted, tightly written, with every joke and character beat serving a purpose. Shows like Fawlty Towers famously had only 12 episodes total across 2 series, but each one is essentially perfect.
2 series? I know in America we call those seasons, but they're series in Britain. But the whole show in America is called the series. What is it, buddy? Keeps putting his paw on my hand. What does that mean? What's he pawing for? Probably food. Peanut butter. Okay. Yeah, I've also heard that a lot of British TV shows are usually written by one person. It's one writer's creation. I think Fawlty Towers was John Cleese and his wife, whose name I forget, sorry. But in America, there's usually a room of writers.
The scarcity mentality created a discipline that became a defining characteristic of British sitcoms. The American approach grew out of commercial television's need to fill primetime slots and generate syndication revenue. Networks needed enough episodes to sell shows into reruns, which required a minimum of around 100 episodes, hence the push for long seasons over multiple years. This abundance mentality encouraged experimentation, character growth over time, and a kind of familiarity that would turn fictional characters into parasocial relationships with the audience. But with streaming, it's completely upended this traditional divide.
Right. Y'all, I just want to go back. I didn't want to stop it so soon, but I want to make note of something here. Look at John Cleese's foot. It's as high as his face. I don't think I could do that. Amazing, John Cleese. Good sir.
But with streaming, it's completely upended this traditional divide. American sitcoms are actually now embracing shorter seasons, 8 to 13 episodes becoming standard, while some British shows are extending their runs for global audiences. Yet, even as the episode structure converges, the underlying philosophies between British and American sitcoms remains distinctly different. Now, the production differences run much deeper. British sitcoms typically operate on budgets that would barely cover the food on a major American production. A BBC sitcom might have a budget of £200,000 to £400,000, while a network American sitcom can easily cost $2 to $4 million.
Wow. Yeah, that's a big price difference. I know a lot of productions are moving from America to Britain simply because of that. And a lot of it, like American productions have to provide insurance for people, and that's really expensive. Yeah, I've mentioned this on this channel before, but Rob Lowe hosted a game show a couple years ago, maybe it's been now. And he said that it was cheaper to take 100 Americans of like a 100-person crew from America, fly them to Ireland, get them hotel rooms and give them per diem and all that stuff, than it was to film this show in Los Angeles at a soundstage that's already set up for that. It's just cheaper. Wild.
This isn't just about money, it's about creative constraints that shape the final product. With smaller budgets, British sitcoms become exercises in efficiency in writing. They rely heavily on dialogue, character-driven humor, and situations that don't require expensive sets or guest stars. Think about shows like Peep Show. The humor comes from character flaws, awkward social situations, and brilliant writing, rather than elaborate setups. American sitcoms with their larger budgets can afford elaborate sets, guest stars, location shoots, and physical comedy that requires expensive staging.
I wonder what she means by that. I don't expensive staging. I mean, a sound stage, but I know most sitcoms have like 2 or 3 sets. And then maybe a rotating set that's somewhere outside of their normal location. But again, I can't even think of a sitcom that's being filmed right now in America. Abbott Elementary. Is that a sitcom? Georgia and Mandy's First Marriage. It's a CBS multi-camera comedy. Okay, that's a sitcom. Usually when I think of a sitcom, I think of a 3-camera setup with a live studio audience. So Georgie and Mandy's First Marriage. I've never heard of that. I've never seen it. Oh. It's filmed at Warner Brothers Studios. Y'all, that's like, I don't want to give away where I live, but that's like 2 miles away. Over the mountain. I'm in Los Feliz. Abbott Elementary, also at Warner Brothers Studios. But I think that's more like it's filmed like a single camera thing, more like a movie. Okay, so there's 2. That's really interesting. And they're both Warner Brothers. Interesting.
Shows like Friends or The Big Bang Theory created iconic spaces like Central Perk, the apartment sets, that became characters in their own right. The laugh track, studio audiences, and multi-camera setups that defined American sitcoms for decades were expensive production choices that reflected the industry's resources. Now, another difference between American and British sitcoms...
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I grew to not like sitcoms anymore was that laugh track. I don't want to hear people laughing. I don't, it's just so inauthentic, you know?
Choices that reflected the industry's resources. Now, another difference between American and British sitcom isn't to do with how much they get paid. It's philosophical. British sitcoms embrace failure, disappointment, and the inherent absurdity of life. American sitcoms traditionally work to overcome these things, or at least find ways to laugh with rather than at their characters. Consider the British approach to character development. In shows like the UK Office, David Brent never really learns or grows. He remains delusional, inappropriate, and cringe-inducing throughout the series. The humor comes from recognizing uncomfortable truths about human nature, our capacity for self-deception, our desperate need for approval, and our ability to remain oblivious to our own shortcomings. The American approach, exemplified by shows like Friends or How I Met Your Mother, tends towards what you might call aspirational dysfunction. The characters have flaws, and they do face setbacks, but there's an underlying optimism that things will work out, that growth is possible, that friendships and love can conquer most problems.
That's true. Yeah, we've talked about this before a few times. There's that difference in humor, and I don't want to get too deep into it, but I do think it is a reflection of the cultures in general. Stephen Fry has a really great comparison of the two styles of humor. He said there's a scene in Animal House with John Belushi from the 80s where there's a guy in the frat house playing a guitar, and then John Belushi walks up, grabs the guitar, and smashes the guitar. And John Belushi epitomizes the American lead character, where he's the wisecracking kind of funny guy. I don't know what you would call wisecracking. I don't know what you would call him, jerk, like kind of guy. And the British humor, in British humor, the lead character would be the guy playing the guitar who gets his guitar smashed up. So it's a different kind of thing. different appreciation.
Even when American sitcoms embrace darker themes like Seinfeld or It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, there's often a cartoonish quality that creates distance between the audience and any real discomfort. This divide reflects deeper cultural attitudes about class and social mobility and the role of institutions in people's lives. British humor often emerges from a rigid class system where your position in life is largely predetermined, making the best response ironic observation rather than aggressive self-improvement. American humor reflects a culture that still believes, despite evidence to the contrary, that anyone can reinvent themselves and achieve their dreams.
Right. Sorry. There was another video I watched that was really brilliant. I don't remember. Oh, I wish I could remember where I heard this. But another difference in the styles of humor is that British humor tends to look at a person who thinks they are more adequate for a job than they actually are, or that they are smarter than they actually are. They look at them and say, "Who do you think you are?" Right? That's kind of the humor. But American humor looks at how absurd the world is and says, "Look at how weird that is." Right? So it's like a different, they're similar, but it's a different thing. I think an interesting comparison can be made between the American show MASH and the British show Dad's Army. So the American show MASH is supposedly funny. You know, that's subjective, but it's a comedy that takes place during the Vietnam War. And that whole situation is the joke, right? But the British show Dad's Army is about these incompetent but endearing guys in the Home Guard who think they're protecting Britain against the Nazis when they're actually kind of incompetent. And the joke is that, you know, who do they think they are? But actually, I mean, they're kind of endearing too, aren't they? They're lovable. Anyway, I think those are two interesting comparisons between the styles because they're both about war.
Speaking of class, this is another difference between British and American sitcoms. British comedy is absolutely obsessed with class distinctions, social hierarchies, and the subtle ways people signal their position in society. Shows like Keeping Up Appearances, Only Fools and Horses, or The Royal Family derive their humor from characters' relationships to class expectations, whether they're trying to rise above their station, maintain their position, or simply navigate the unspoken rules that govern British life. American sitcoms, by contrast, tend to treat class as either invisible or temporary. Even when characters are clearly working class, like the Connors and Roseanne, the shows often focus on their resilience, humor, and family bonds rather than the systemic issues that keep them in their situations. There's an implicit assumption that class position is something you can change through hard work and personal growth, and the difference shows up in the comedy itself. British humor relies heavily on subtext, irony, and the things people don't say directly. Characters communicate through coded language, meaningful glances, and shared understandings of social rules. American sitcoms tend to be more direct, with characters saying exactly what they mean and conflicts getting resolved through honest conversations.
Right. And we learned in another Girl Gone London, y'all be sure to go to Girl Gone London and like and subscribe. But she did another video about the communication styles, and Britain is a high context communication style and America is a low context communication style. So that also leads to the British understatements. America doesn't really have that. If we do sarcasm, it's done with, like, you know, a very obvious presentation.
And again, the humor in a British sitcom comes from recognizing the subtext. American sitcom dialogue emphasizes wit and wordplay and snappy comebacks that make characters seem cleverer than real people actually are.
That's another thing I don't like about sitcoms, is that every line has to be a wisecrack or like some cynical put down. I just don't like that. And I think that's actually from decades of sitcoms, it's caused people to have this idea that that's how you communicate in the world and that that's funny, that that's having a good sense of humor. But I don't like that. I don't like that wisecracking stuff.
The rhythm in an American sitcom is faster, the jokes are more explicit, and by that I mean easier to understand, and there's often a competitive element where characters try to top each other's lines.
Right.
Think about the rapid-fire dialogue in shows like 30 Rock or Brooklyn Nine-Nine. It's comedy as verbal athletics.
Now, 30 Rock, they're not always trying to put each other down or outdo each other. They're oftentimes revealing some flaw in themselves without realizing it. 30 Rock is brilliant. 30 Rock might be my favorite sitcom. It's pretty brilliant. The jokes just come at you really, really quick.
Now, the streaming revolution has created the most significant shift in sitcom production since the invention of television. Traditional network models on both sides of the pond are being disrupted, but in ways that also show the differences. Shows like Ted Lasso combine American production values with British sensibilities, while Afterlife brings British bleakness to global audiences through Netflix's distribution power. But British streaming sitcoms still tend towards shorter series, more challenging themes, and humor that requires cultural fluency to really appreciate.
Yeah, what do y'all think of Ted Lasso? I think it was kind of a right thing at the right time. It came out during COVID, and it had a lot of feel-good kind of stuff in it. It wasn't your typical TV show in terms of the themes. Fish out of water, I mean, that's a pretty typical theme. But it was different. And then I think the world moved on.
American streaming sitcoms do still favor longer seasons, broader appeal, and comedy that translates easily across different markets. And when American producers tried to adapt British sitcoms for US audiences, the results were often illuminating failures that highlighted exactly why each are unique. The American version of The Office succeeded because it abandoned much of what made the British version distinctly British. Steve Carell's Michael Scott was given more likable characteristics than David Brent. The supporting characters were allowed to grow and change over time, and the overall tone was warmer, more optimistic, and more forgiving of human weakness. It was essentially an American sitcom inspired by a British format rather than a true adaptation.
Right.
Similarly, when British producers have tried to adapt American formats, they often struggle with the relentless positivity and high energy that characterizes American comedy.
I wonder what that's like. So we always compare the two offices, right? And I really enjoyed the British Office, but there were times when I had to stop it. I had to pause it and step away because it was so cringy. David Brent is such a cringy character. When he starts dancing in front of people, oh God, there were so many moments that I had to step away. But yeah, I bet the sweetness of the American Office probably puts a lot of British people off. Because there are moments where, like, characters, like, at the end, we're all a family, everything's good, we all love each other and support each other. That's probably so, like, eye-rolling to British people, isn't it? And it's interesting to think of it from a British producer's idea, if they're trying to adapt an American sitcom for British audiences. What that must be like. I don't know. If any of y'all are TV producers, let me know in the comments and cast me in your next project.
The pacing to a British audience feels forced. The optimism seems false, and the result just doesn't work. Now that brings me to the end of this episode. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.
She may have just answered my question. It probably feels really inauthentic, right? Like overly sweet and like fake. Y'all be sure to go to Girl Gone London and like and subscribe. I think it would be really fun to be on a sitcom. I don't know if you know this, but I am an actor and I've been on some TV shows. But never a sitcom. I've done some plays, and I think doing theater would probably be more similar to a sitcom than doing a TV show or a film or a commercial. Because there's the live studio audience, the set is more like a theater. You got to do the pauses for laughs. I bet it's like doing theater, yeah. Anyway, very interesting. It's all like, I think a sense of humor is a sign of genius. And humor is a very strong reflection of the way a culture exists I love how British culture has this juxtaposition of very like strictness, not all the time, but from an American's perspective, there's this very you have the posh upper class kind of uptight stereotype, but then there's this really brutal speaking of truth to power and tearing them down. And also whimsical things like nonsense. That juxtaposition is really funny, and I think it shows a very dynamic sense of culture. In America, we have those things too, but it's just not as dynamic. It's not as extreme, I don't think. And I think that is a reflection of the class system. Yeah. Anyway, be sure to go to Girl Gone London and like and subscribe. I'd like to thank my patrons. I'd like to thank my Buy Me a Coffee folks. Thank y'all for watching this with me, and I'll see y'all next time.